Conrad, it's good to have a chance to sit and chat a little bit about ChildVoice. What is it and what do you do?
Thanks, Bob. That's a great question because I think sometimes it feels a little complicated to tell what it is we do because it's so comprehensive. But in short, our whole mission is to help kids recover from the trauma and effects of war and move into a pathway towards health and independence. Obviously, we recognize that coming to grips with who they are in Christ is a big part of that.
Wow, what you just described is an enormous task.
I know.
An enormous task. Did you just have to think like, all right, so where do you start? I put a shovel on the ground somewhere. And the first shovel went in.
We're starting our 19th year, which is shocking to me I remember the days when we wondered whether we'd make it to the next month. And here we are 19 years later, still working in northern Uganda where we started. Back then, there was a civil conflict going on between the LRA, the Lord's Resistance Army, and the government. That had been going on for 25 years at that point. And they estimate, I think the number's closer to 40,000 kids have been abducted by this rebel group and forced to become child soldiers. And a friend of mine invited me to come and see what was going on because there was a significant need to help kids who were escaping or being captured by the government to come home because they really, truly were third culture kids. Even their families and communities didn't know them anymore. And some of these kids had been literally raised in the bush with the rebels for years. Some of these kids, a lot of these kids were abducted when they were 7 or 8 years old. And by the time they escaped, they were in their teens.
South Sudan, Uganda, you saw the need. How did God work?
Well, most of my career has been working in the with at-risk populations. I'd done a lot of work in the U.S. over the years, working with at-risk kids, building mentoring programs, building residential programs for at-risk kids. So when I was asked to come and see this, my mind immediately went to what are the sort of interventions that would be useful to help these kids reintegrate, recover from their trauma, and change the way that they were living. So on one hand, when I saw what I saw in 2006 when we went on the first time, I was overwhelmed for sure because it was an active conflict zone and you went to bed at night with gunfire and you know, the place where we were staying went literally dark at night because you didn't want to signal to the rebels where you were. But on the other hand, I could see a pathway, something that needed to be done that nobody was doing. And the truth of the matter was there were over 600 relief organizations working in that area. Nobody was doing what I would call development work, helping kids get on a long-term path towards success. So that's where I saw the gap. But honestly, I was working as a consultant. I'd come with a concept that I was hoping to pitch to other NGOs that were already working there, like World Vision, like Save the Children. Nobody was ready to go there yet. And in fact, some of them said, we would never do what you're proposing to do. So I came home from that trip, really my heart broken by what I had seen and experienced, but also recognizing somebody needed to step up and step up now. And so we came home and made the prayerful decision to start another organization, which at the moment I was convinced didn't need to happen, but somebody needed to do what needed to fill that gap.
So you're stepping into a void. The other groups were meeting more immediate needs.
Yes, exactly.
And you won't be hungry today.
Right.
Right. But you were looking to try to heal lives for the long haul.
Yeah. It's pretty hard to do trauma healing if you take a one-off sort of approach, you know, just by providing relief, because these kids kids that have been abducted at that age, forced to kill their own brothers and sisters, sometimes their parents, and then forced to be a child soldier and kill others. You can't turn that story around overnight. That was something I knew was going to need years of work.
So when you're in a hot zone, which you were, right, your organization's going in, how do you handle the geopolitical situation, it's obviously that's got to be a delicate walk.
Well, one of the things that we recognized that needed to be done right off the bat was that we needed to bring nationals on board with us. This would not be something I could do from the outside. I had grown up on the mission field in Cameroon, West Africa, back going on 60 years ago now. In the day, yeah. And I remember that everything was done by expats, and it wasn't sustainable. In fact, the hospital that my father built as a surgeon closed several years later because they weren't able to transition it to national leadership. And I vowed I wasn't going to make that mistake again. So from the very beginning, we brought on nationals onto our team, and we tried to empower those people to do the work that needed to be done. So when you're in a geopolitical situation like that, where local knowledge is needed to be able to make decisions, our national staff were able to do that much better than we could do from the outside. Mm-hmm. And that continues to be the case.
So it's sort of navigating your way through the political traffic, right, to find a safe space.
Yep.
You could operate in the midst.
Right. I've been in situations that have been a little hairy where we've literally been at the point of arrest by rebels and others. And I would basically bank on the fact that they were not probably going to arrest an American. And I was emboldened by that, probably stupidly, but we've been blessed over the years not to have had a serious incident in all the years that we've operated in some of the most dangerous places in the world.
What countries is ChildVoice involved in now?
So where we are in northern Uganda, we're still there. That center-based program that we started is still operational. But then Uganda is one of the friendliest places for refugees anywhere in the world. And so there are refugees coming in from all over East and Central Africa into Uganda. So we started work in 2018 up in the refugee gazetted area along the South Sudan border there. So South Sudanese refugees, there's over 1 million of them there. There's a growing number of Congolese from DRC that are coming across the border. We've heard stories of Eritreans coming in from places along the Horn of Africa that are in dire straits at the moment. So with our community-based programs, our girl empowerment centers in those regions, we are serving Congolese, South Sudanese, as well as Ugandans from that border region there. We also started in 2018 in northeast Nigeria with Boko Haram victims there. And those programs are growing, and we're excited about the impact that's happening there. Hugely different population. Those kids that we're serving there are 95% Muslim. We have to operate differently and much more from a friendship evangelism point of view than we do in Uganda, which is, quote, a Christian nation. And just this year, in January, we opened work in Ukraine and also Moldova across the border, which is, even though they're 31 years post-occupation from Russia in the Soviet days, that is still very much a war-affected country. They've never recovered from that.
So, similar situations, new countries, do you bring the same model with you? Or do you have to, obviously you have to adapt?
Well, from the very beginning, and again, this came out of my consulting work, I was very intentional about trying to create a model that could be replicated. Mm-hmm. And so we've taken those same principles from Uganda into Nigeria. And I was surprised when I was in Ukraine in a year ago in May, that people were telling me, come and help us learn what you've done in Africa. I was honestly shocked to hear that because I didn't expect, number one, that they would have heard what we had done, but we had a couple partners on the ground that were very familiar with our work. And they were saying, what you guys have been doing there is desperately needed here. Youth ministry in Eastern Europe is largely event-oriented. So they'll run summer camps and they'll have parties at Christmas and Easter. But nobody does ongoing day-to-day work. And now that you've got a traumatized population of kids in Ukraine. That's what's desperately needed. That's what they don't know how to do, and that's what we're trying to help them learn how to do.
God has placed you in some places of incredible need. What are some ways in which you've seen him show up?
Well, I think it's interesting, and it's in some ways still surprising to me that we've impacted over 10,000 kids and families in Africa now. And so when you think about some of those stories, I'm reminded of a girl named Monica who was a abductee with the LRA. And about a third of those kids that the LRA had abducted were girls. They not only were trained to be fighters, but they were also sex slaves to the commanders. And so oftentimes when those kids came home, like Monica, who escaped during a firefight from the LRA, she came back into Uganda with two children, one who died shortly thereafter, and the other one she was trying to raise on her own. And she also had some injuries from gunshots that we needed to deal with when she came to our center in 2011. Finished our program, did incredibly well. But she was a kid who didn't have a place to go after she graduated, after 2 years. And so we hired her to work on our farm at the Lukumi Center, which she did for about 3 years. And unfortunately, and this is sort of an interesting thing, because we ended up having to terminate her employment because of some issues that we were having with her. Hard decision to make, right decision for our staff and the others that were there at the time. But the cool thing is that we have a strong emphasis on aftercare. So when our kids graduate from a program like that, we follow them 3 to 5 years after they leave us. So when she had to leave because of this termination, our staff stayed with her. And I began to hear stories of this transformation that she was making. She ended up marrying another former child soldier. She ended up moving to another place, creating a farm for herself. So she now had some livestock and she was taking care of that. But she also was elected because of her own disabilities to be the government representative for her region as a disability representative. She's a member of her church. She's leading the choir.
Wow.
And when you think about a girl like that, who not only had such a hard life before she came to us, but then that transformation that happened when she was there, she's been able to build off that. Now, 10 years later, she's having this incredible impact, broader impact, not only on her family, but her community as well.
So baked into the cake, right, of restoration is forgiveness.
Yep.
And for people who've had some pretty hellacious things take place in their lives, how have you seen the power of forgiveness?
Honestly, when I stepped into this back in 2006, the area I was overwhelmed in, because I'm not a psychologist, was how do you deal with the incredible impact of trauma and post-traumatic stress disorder and those sorts of things that literally not only had paralyzed these kids in many ways, but they couldn't function at home anymore. And so in many cases, they were chased away by their own families and communities because they were deemed dangerous or whatever. And I began to, as I pondered that, as I prayed about that, I began to realize that, Jesus said, bring your stuff to the foot of the cross, leave it here. And his lessons on forgiveness began to really resonate with me. And I realized that because I didn't know anything else, that's what I was going to rely on. So we built a forgiveness therapy model at ChildVoice that continues to this day. And we've seen incredible impacts in terms of freedom from post-traumatic stress disorder and the effects of trauma. So 2 years, 3 years after these kids leave us, that is not, the scars are still there, but they're able to function again. We recognize that in a perfect world, reconciliation should be the goal. But that means that the perpetrator has to ask for forgiveness and the victim needs to offer forgiveness. And at that point, you can achieve reconciliation. But in many cases, these kids will never have their perpetrator come. and ask for forgiveness. And these kids have dealt with rape and defilement and abductions and all this stuff. So what we've said is that when you come to know what Christ has done for you, you can now in turn extend that forgiveness to someone who may not even be in the room with you, but has done all these harmful things and hurtful things to you. And at that point, things change and transformation begins.
Wow. So when you see an ocean of need, right, where do you start? One person at a time.
Yeah.
And to see that journey, and what a privilege to not only walk that journey with them.
Oh yeah.
But to have God use your hands and feet and those of your colleagues.
Well, I think the exponential effect of all of this is what's so critical, because, we have a community service element of what we do. We want our kids, even though they have been deemed to be, the victims of so much, we want them to see need in others and reach out and meet that need. And that's one of the most exciting things for me today, is to get reports back in the community service that these kids are doing in the communities around them. The impact that they're making, people are seeing that, they're experiencing it, and our kids are finding enjoyment and fulfillment in doing it. I think that lends itself to sort of this exponential effect. When they go home, it's not only about them, it's about their family, their extended family, and their community and beyond.
Is that what fuels you?
The stories that I hear. I mean, I just read an article about a 10-year-old kid in Ukraine whose home was bombed, and his mom was, the ceiling came down on his mom, and he couldn't free her. She ended up dying. And this kid's trying to figure out life now, still in an active conflict zone, but he doesn't have anybody.
Yeah.
And when I read stories like that, I think that's the kind of kid that ChildVoice exists for.
What are your dreams for the future?
Well, when I think about the millions of kids that are growing up in darkness and in the shadow of war, I'm watching Gaza, I'm watching Myanmar, I'm watching these places around the world and thinking we need to get to those places. Because I think the kind of things that we offer are the kinds of things that help kids not only navigate life while in conflict, but give them hope for the future.
Mm.
Because I think without that, they believe this is going to be my life, and it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, I mean, you give them a future.
Yeah, exactly.
Something that they've probably given up on.
Yeah.
Right? You could be
They can't even imagine
17
it.
years old,
Yeah.
giving up.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that is just remarkable. How can people find out more about ChildVoice?
Well,
Or support it? There you go.
Well, Bethany's been an amazing partner of ours for many, many years, and supported what we do and prayed for us as we travel. And we would love to take a team at some point here in the near future from Bethany to visit some of our sites and find the amazing people that are working for us in the field.
All right. Thanks so much for what you do.
Yeah.
Thanks for chatting.
Yeah.